Welcome, APUSH students. We are going to be looking at Period 5 review today, which is Civil War and Reconstruction. Again, at least part 2 of it is. Last week we also did the antebellum period, which is part 1 from 1844 to 1861. And we're going to get started basically with what starts the Civil War, which is Lincoln's election. The Civil War is probably the most deadliest of the U.S. wars, with hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers dying, both Northern and Southerners, of course. And it goes on for 4.5 years. What starts it, obviously, is the election of 1860. Lincoln will win this election with only 40% vote, with only regional support in the North, and pretty much South Carolina leaves almost immediately. The people that are pushing South Carolina to leave are those fire eaters, or these radical Democrats that wanted secession. Soon thereafter, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all leave the Union within that first month. Many of the border states, like North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, to name a couple, do wait before they make a decision on either to leave or stay. These deep South states, though, do form the Confederate States of America with a temporary capital in Montgomery, Alabama, and named Jefferson Davis as their president. A last-ditch effort to actually get the South back into the Union was proposed by Kentucky Representative John Crittenden. And his amendment would be basically allowing slavery below the 36-30 line of the Missouri Compromise, and it would be extended all the way to the California border. It was obviously rejected with a lot of Northern support, or a lot of Northern Republicans now in Congress. It was rejected with very little support. When Lincoln takes office, he promises in his inaugural address to permit slavery in the existing slave states, but he also promises to remove any ability to expand slavery into the territories. And with his House divided speech back in the Lincoln-Douglas debates in the senatorial race of 1858, the South was like, nope, we aren't going to have that. So they continued to basically secede. He wanted to preserve the Union, so he does state that the Confederate secession was illegal, and that any property that is Union held, like any forts or armories, would continue to be Union property regardless of what state they fell into. And the battle that starts this war is the Battle of Fort Sumter. It's located in Charleston Harbor. It was attacked by the Confederates on April 12th, 1861. And right after this, we see those northern states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and then Arkansas, of course, also leave. This was big because they also take some of the best generals with them, including General Robert E. Lee. 4 states that were slave states did stay with the Union, with Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, and Kentucky all staying with the Union, with Kentucky probably being the most important in Maryland. Maryland housed the national capital, well, not officially, but again, it was surrounded by Maryland. And Kentucky was a very strategic state because its northern border was the Ohio River, which the South would have been easily able then to use that river to then travel into other northern states to attack. And we see here the states that did leave the Union, the states that did stay with the Union, and the order that they stayed or they left. Okay, the advantages for each side. We're going to look at this in several parts. This is a great chart right here, though, because it tells us how much advantages the North had in just their natural ability with their large population, manufactured goods. They had their huge amount of merchant ships, huge transportation network with the railroads. They had basically the breadbasket with New York and Pennsylvania being major grain producers, not only for domestic but also international trade. They had lots of small-scale farms. They had all the major iron-producing areas and factories. And also they had a huge resource of banking capital. The one real big thing the South did have, chart-wise, was they did compare sort of favorably in exports because of their big importance on cotton. Okay, some of the Confederate advantages were the ones that were not so easily seen. They were the home field advantage, short supply lines, fighting a defensive war rather than an offensive war. They had the best military generals, at least to the very start of this. And also they had this King Cotton that basically they called it King Cotton because they thought that both France and England would stay with the South because of this cheap, really good quality cotton that was being flooded into Europe and the threat of it being stopped. Okay, so the reasons why the Union wins this war. Here's some of the big ones. Even though the Confederates had some of the early success that really put some scare into the Union itself, because a lot of people thought this war would just quickly be, smeltered out and stomped out by Lincoln. But the Confederates actually had a run of really good battles. Again, probably the most important one, the Battle of Bull Run. But after a few months, the North gets it together. One, their greater industry, their infrastructure, and their manpower are able to kick into war mode and able to just really overproduce and mass produce over the South in bullets and guns and other manufactured goods. Also, by the first year, we start seeing some of these not so great generals being removed and some really good generals emerging in the North, like William Tecumseh Sherman and Ulysses Grant, to name two of the really strong Union generals to combat the strength of the Confederate generals. And then also the total war strategy of the North. Basically, the North was willing to destroy Southern environment at all costs. Also, Lincoln's Anaconda Plan. Basically, his plan to sort of suffocate the Southerners and their ability to trade with the outside world, this Anaconda Plan. It was very successful. And here's some of the big battles. Again, the AP test does not test about battles in any great degree, but these are the ones that could come up, at least in writing, prompts to add into context or understanding and stuff like that. Obviously, Antietam was a really important battle because it was an early battle that the North won, and it prevented European engagement. It also will set the stage for emancipation, which we'll talk to in a slide or two. The Battle of Gettysburg was the most northern battle. Again, there's other ones that are closer, but again, the most major one. And it was really the only major battle that was fought in Union territory. And so the Northerners were able to stop the spread of Confederacy in the North, and really this was the last major offensive the Confederates are going to take. You see the battles of Vicksburg, where Grant will basically take the Vicksburg, Mississippi, and will be able to control the Mississippi River. And with that, also breaking up the Confederacy into two pieces, a western and also eastern piece. And then the Sherman's March to the Sea will be this ultimate, basically a swath of destruction that Tecumseh Sherman will devastate, basically a swath of land from Atlanta to Savannah. And it also not only physically destroys the South, really it morally demoralizes them in a big way. And the last one will never really be on the AP test, but the Siege of Richmond will take the Confederate capital, and within a month the Southerners will surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Okay, so to mobilize the country to get into the war, the North did create a draft. Well, so did the South did too, but both sides did. The North adopts this Universal Conscription Act, and for the most part, it had some good results. But there were some problems with it. The big problem was that Northerners could be able to pay $300 to get someone to take their spot. And this obviously affected poor people a lot more than rich people because, again, poor people would not be able to afford this. Also, there was a huge amount of riots, with the biggest one being in New York City in 1862 because of this. You see Irish immigrants attack both wealthy and African Americans. In the South, the draft was met with a lot of animosity because it goes against the states' rights agenda. Also, Southern planters could get out of the draft if basically they owned 20 or more slaves. They are exempt from the draft. So, Northern economic policies. With no more Democrats in Congress, well, no, that's not true. No more Southern Democrats in Congress. Lincoln could really sort of pass whatever type of legislation that he wanted for the most part. He had pretty much carte blanche when it comes to economic policy. And so he does that. He really readapts Clay's American system. Not only does he incorporate a new national bank to stabilize the Union's economy. He's going to basically propose a northern route for the Transcontinental Railway. He's going to create not only the Morrill Land Grant Act, but also the Homestead Act, which really opens up the West for expansion. Again, not much expansion during the Civil War itself, but a lot of expansion for the years after the Civil War. Also, he's going to use many tactics to raise money for the war. Obviously, he's going to increase taxes and tariffs, but he will also create the Legal Tender Act, which will authorize Congress to print a huge amount of new notes. Printing of, actually, it's 150 million in notes, not 150 in notes. And these are called greenbacks. And the reason why they were successful is because these greenbacks had the trust that they'd be paid back at full face value because of what Hamilton did after the Revolutionary War and in his financial plans. Also, even if the North lost this war, the North was not going to actually ever cease to become a country. And so the faith was, even if the worst case scenario, the North loses the South, these greenbacks will still be honored. That's a problem with the South, because if the South lost the war, their currency was not going to be honored. So the Southern's economic policy was all based pretty much on king cotton, its major export to England and France. But the problem is that once the Anaconda Plan took place and trade was cut off, the South was pretty much suffocating. The Confederacy opposed taxes and tariffs, so they had a really hard time paying for this war. And what they did, they printed a huge amounts of Confederate currency with huge inflation rates where pretty much this currency became almost valueless immediately. Okay, emancipation. It started with the Confiscation Act, pretty much that anything that was taken over by the Union, all Confederate slaves or property would be then in Union hands, so confiscated by the Unions. And at that point, the Union would basically free these confiscated property. This was a way to get around officially Indian slavery. Because again, Lincoln did not want to upset those border states that stayed with them: Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, and Delaware. So this was a way to get around it. In 1862, he ended the slavery in Washington, D.C., which doesn't really affect those border states. And then also that year, in 1862, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation that pretty much ends slavery in all the Confederate rebellious territory, which actually doesn't end slavery in America. But it does put this war as a moral war, or having moral causes within this war. And that's going to be huge, because in the history books, we now look at the Civil War as a war to end slavery, not just a war to keep the Union together. And also, this really helped push England and France from not contributing to the South at all because of their moral stance against slavery as well. And of course, there is going to be some opposition in the North. For example, Lincoln, because of a lot of a dissupport in border states like Kentucky, and then even in some northern states like Indiana, so Maryland, for example, there was a lot of dissent, a lot of talking not so great about the government. So he basically suspends the writ of habeas corpus, making it illegal to speak badly, and also the ability to jail the people who do. Also, in the election of 1864, Lincoln has to not only run against Democrats, but also he has opponents of radical Republicans, both war and peace Democrats, and also Copperheads. He does win this election, though, with the help of Tecumseh Sherman and his march to the sea. That happens right before the election actually happens. Okay, the war will be over and Reconstruction will ensue. Before the war actually ends, though, Reconstruction gets its start. Right after the election of 1864, immediately pretty much, Lincoln will push Congress to create the 13th Amendment that emancipates the slaves. Then, before the war is over, he also institutes his 10% plan, a very relaxed, lenient plan to incorporate the South back into the Union with very little steps for them to do that. He never has a chance to put it forth, so we don't know how this radical Congress would have reacted to it. Probably not passing it, but maybe be a benchmark then to compromise on. In Congress, though, before the war is over, they do pass the Wade-Davis bill. It'll be pushed by radical Congress, extremely harsh Reconstruction plan, pretty much very punitive and punishing the South. Again, it does pass Congress, but Lincoln vetoes it. And congressional Reconstruction. Obviously, after Lincoln gets assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, the radical Republicans are going to take Reconstruction policy over from President Johnson. Johnson tries to do a lot of slippery things, like create his own Reconstruction policy when Congress is in recess. Congress gets back in recess and pretty much sort of puts the clamps down on Johnson himself. Johnson will veto the Freedmen's Bureau, the Civil Rights Bill, and really he'll use the veto more times than any president before him, even Jackson. And so Congress is going to have to override his vetoes in many, many cases. Again, he's going to be a very unlike president with Congress. So in 1867, the radicals in Congress will create the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which will really be the guidelines to get the South back into the Union. It is pretty strict, and it will divide the South into 5 military districts controlled by military generals, which it will, so the South will be under military rule to keep them in order until they actually have certain qualifications. Those qualifications will basically be a new state constitution, including black suffrage rights, also the ratification and passage of both the 13th and 14th Amendments. And there's how the military districts go and the dates of them coming back into the Union. As you see, the Tennessee is going to be the first one back into the Union, just a year. Okay, because of this cantankerous relationship between Congress and the president, the Congress really tries to set up the president to fail and really much, almost make him break the law so they would have a reason to remove him. So Congress creates a Tenure of Office Act, basically to make sure that the Senate must approve any presidential dismissal of any cabinet official or general. The reason why they wanted to do this, they wanted Johnson to set himself up to remove a Secretary of War that he really didn't like. And he will do that. He will remove Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. And once he does that, he violates this law, this act. So the House immediately votes to impeach him. And they do. Pretty much, almost, cross-party lines. The Senate, though, has big debate on this. And they will fall one vote short of the 2/3 that was required for removal. So it's very close at all. And again, he's the closest president to be removed from office after House impeachment. And Reconstruction did have some successes, even though in the history books, we will look at Reconstruction as probably more of a failure than a success. Again, there's a much easier argument to create and to argue about the failures of Reconstruction because they're so blatant, and they're so written on the walls, and the discrepancies between black and white are so drawn out and lasting 100+ years into the 1900s and even into the 21st century. So, but here's some of the successes. One, it does reunite the Union. The Union's still together and full. So that's one success. It does open up some short-term political opportunities for former slaves to become not only local and state representatives, but also House of Representatives and one senator, Herman Revels. Also, we have 3 new constitutional amendments that are created. The 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. The 14th Amendment to grant citizenship basically to all men, regardless of race. So I guess it gives all men the equal protection of the laws and due process. And also the 15th Amendment, which is male black suffrage. Again, that was also a failure because many women thought that was a slap in their face because they were not given suffrage at the same time. Some of the big failures of Reconstruction, here they are. Obviously, the 13th and 14th Amendments could be seen as long-term successes. However, though, the enforcement of those would absolutely fall under failures. Even though blacks got their freedoms and civil rights, they were immediately put into secondary class citizenship right away in the South. Black votes were created to basically guarantee that blacks stay close to the plantation system and are there as a labor supply, and restore pre-emancipation systems of race relations. Sharecropping was a system that was basically to put African Americans into almost perpetual debt with their landowners. And with that, they were in not only social economic ties with them, but this debtor's tie also. So a very negative system there. Some other failures is the rise of the KKK in the southern areas to basically secure white supremacy and push back any advancement of black rights. You have redeemer governments coming in to try to push out radical Republicans, push out the Republican governments, the carpetbaggers, the scallywags, and those African American elected officials, those redeemer governments. And then eventually the North is going to start to lose interest in Reconstruction. After 15 years, within the 19th or 1870s, we're going to start seeing that even though there is some laws to protect African Americans, there's not going to be the actual enforcement of the laws. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 guarantees equal access in public places. But a decade later, the Supreme Court will overturn this in the slaughterhouse cases of 1883. And also election of 1876, the compromise will finally undo Reconstruction officially. Some more failures are some basically new amendments and the fights that the South have against them. So, example, they're going to create a situation of segregation or these Jim Crow laws, the Jim Crow South. And eventually you're going to see the Plessy versus Ferguson basically cement that into law. You're going to see massive disenfranchisement. Whites basically using literacy tests and poll taxes and grandfather clauses and all sorts of different tools to keep blacks from exercising their 15th Amendment voting rights. Also, we're going to see a huge wave of violence in the KKK, even though President Grant that is, passes the KKK Act to sort of limit them. We still see this rampant throughout the times up until the 1960s. And eventually, what officially will end Reconstruction will be the election of 1876, and this such close election because 3 states send in 2 sets of electoral ballots to the House of Representatives. Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina both send in dual sets. The House goes to special committee, and Hayes will win the vote 8-7. But the Democrats threatened to hold up election unless some compromises are being made. So there's Hayes, there's Tilden, and again, there's a lot of discrepancy. Did African Americans in those states actually really get the right to vote truly, or were they pushed into voting for the other candidate? In this compromise, the Democrats protest election. The Republicans will secretly give up control of the South, Carolina and Louisiana, where they're already being protected by federal troops. So pretty much they will remove the federal troops officially, and thus ends Reconstruction officially in 1877. Obviously, Reconstruction still goes on throughout the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, and again, still in conceptual terms all the way through until the 1970s. But yeah, this is the end of period 5. This immediately moves into period 6 with the Gilded Age and American Western movement, and so there's a very much melding of those two. So there's a lot of melding between Gilded Age politics and Reconstruction era South. So again, the AP test sometimes weave these 2 periods in essay prompts. So again, it's not just a cut and dry essay prompt like some of them are, where it definitely ends with one time period. Again, there is a lot of melding in this time period of different time periods and different genres too. So you have Reconstruction, you have American West movement, you have Gilded Age, you have imperialism, all sort of mixing and matching in this one time period. Okay, hope that ironed some things out for period 5 and the Reconstruction Civil War. Great to be with you guys, and keep studying, study hard, and see you next time.